The case of Andrea Yates is it's one of the most agonizing examples of how mental illness, the medical system, and the law can collide
Yeah,
with just devastating results.
it really is.
Today, we're going to conduct a thorough analysis of the sources surrounding the tragedy that happened in Houston, Texas in June of 2001.
When Andrea Yates drowned her 5 young children.
Yes.
And it is essential, I think, right from the start that we approach this with the gravity and compassion it demands.
Absolutely.
We have to acknowledge the immense suffering and, of course, the 5 young lives that were lost: Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary.
Our sources, they really place this entire case under a microscope, especially how the American legal system tried to handle a crisis that was rooted in, well, in conditions like postpartum psychosis and
Wow.
later schizophrenia.
So our mission here is to objectively review the facts,
The timeline.
the medical timeline specifically. Yes, and the competing arguments that were presented during her trials. This isn't about passing judgment. It's about trying to understand the mechanisms, both medical and legal, that failed to stop this from happening.
We have sources that cover the entire story, from her background to the warning signs that were, tragically missed.
Or dismissed.
Or dismissed, yes.
Right.
And then the event itself and the years of legal controversy that came after.
And we really have to look at the systematic questions this case raised about the
Yeah.
roles played by her husband, her doctors, even insurance companies.
And of course, the very rigid legal definitions of sanity.
Exactly.
So when we look at Andrea Yates's early life, it creates such a stark contrast to what happened later.
It really does.
She was born Andrea Pia Kennedy in 1964 in Houston, and the sources all describe a life that was just. It was marked by real promise, real achievement.
Absolutely. The documents show a very high-achieving student. She was the youngest of 5 children, and she truly excelled. She graduated as the valedictorian of her high school in 1982.
And she wasn't just, book smart. She was involved. She was captain of the swim team and officer in the National Honor Society.
Right. This is someone who is engaged and successful.
From there, she went into healthcare. She completed her pre-nursing education and earned her RN degree.
A registered nurse.
And she worked for 8 years at the MD Anderson Cancer Center from 1986 to 1994. I mean, this detail really stands out because it shows she was a competent professional person. Her career was about caring for other people.
But the sources also establish an important history of mental vulnerability. And this was long before her marriage and her children.
Okay.
We learned that she struggled quite a bit with bulimia and depression as a teenager.
So there was a history there.
A definite history. At 17, she even spoke to a friend about suicide. So, this isn't just a sudden illness that appears in adulthood. There was a predisposition there that made her susceptible to a severe breakdown later on.
And then in 1989, she met Russell Yates, who everyone called Rusty.
He was a NASA engineer. They met, and they married in 1993.
And their shared religious commitment, specifically a very strong evangelical Christian faith, that seems to become a key factor in defining their family.
It's a huge factor. That commitment is laid out very explicitly in the source material. They actually announced they would seek to have as many babies as nature allowed.
So this wasn't just a casual desire for a big family.
No, it was a mission, a religiously driven procreative mission, and it resulted in a very, very rapid succession of children.
And that rapid expansion, you couple that with frequent moves, and it just adds this profound environmental stress.
It does. They started out in a typical house, but then Rusty's career led to some instability.
They moved around a lot.
A lot. He took a job in Florida, and they moved into what the sources describe as a very small trailer. They were constantly shifting environments, which, is stressful for any young family.
Let alone one growing that quickly.
Exactly. By the time their 3rd child was born, they had bought a GMC motorhome and were living in it.
Living in a motorhome with 3 small children.
And moving back towards Houston.
Just think about that for a second. Raising 3, soon to be 5, children in these confined temporary spaces, while also holding on to these intense religious and personal demands.
That's an incredible amount of pressure. And that transition from a professional nurse to a constantly moving mother of 5, it happened in just 6 years.
Precisely. The children were born between 1994 and 2000, Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary.
And at the time of their deaths in June 2001, Noah, who was the oldest, he was only 7. And Mary, the youngest, was just 6 months old.
The sheer physical and emotional demand of caring for 5 children under the age of 7.
Without a lot of professional support, and sometimes in a motorhome. It's just immense.
And the sources, they really seem to pinpoint the birth of the fourth child, Luke, in 1999. That seems to be the moment the system really broke down and her earlier vulnerabilities just surged into a full-blown crisis.
That timeline from 1999 to 2001, it's just a shocking sequence of medical emergencies and, frankly, insufficient intervention after Luke was born.
In February of 99.
Yes. The depression that she had experienced as a teenager, it came back with a terrifying intensity.
And by June of that year, just 4 months after Luke was born, Rusty found her shaking uncontrollably, obsessively chewing her fingers.
The very next day, she attempted suicide by overdosing on pills, and that led to her first hospitalization.
And this is where we really need to clarify something for you. The difference between standard postpartum depression, or PPD, and what she was diagnosed with.
Postpartum psychosis, PPC.
Right. They are not the same thing.
Not at all. PPD is sadly common. It involves severe mood swings, anxiety, sadness. But PPC, which is very rare, is a psychiatric urgency.
An emergency.
It involves extreme confusion, hallucinations, paranoia, delusions. It's a complete break from reality, which is what we see later in Andrea's case.
And her condition, it only stabilized for a short time. Soon after she was released, she was hospitalized again.
Because she was begging Rusty to let her die and was found holding a knife to her own neck.
It was during this second hospitalization that doctors really solidified that diagnosis of postpartum psychosis, and they introduced an antipsychotic medication.
And that intervention was absolutely crucial. She was treated with Haldol. It's a powerful antipsychotic, and the sources confirm her condition improved immediately once the Haldol was in her system.
So this provides a critical baseline, doesn't it?
It does. They knew exactly what worked to control her psychosis.
But then comes the moment that, in hindsight, is just. It's the most tragic missed opportunity. The explicit medical warning against having more children.
This is really the central ethical dilemma that the source material draws out. Dr. Eileen Starbranch, who was Yates's first psychiatrist, gave crystal clear warnings.
To both of them.
To both Andrea and Rusty. She testified that she urged them not to conceive again, stating definitively in her medical notes that doing so would guarantee future psychotic depression.
Guarantee. That's not a risk. That's a guarantee.
Exactly. It's an extraordinary phrase for a doctor to use.
Yet, the source material documents that she conceived their fifth and final child, Mary, just 7 weeks after she was discharged from Dr. Starbranch's care.
And this leads to that critical analysis of the spousal and religious dynamics at play. I mean, why would you ignore such a dire, specific medical warning?
The material actually provides an answer from Yates herself. She gave it to a prison psychiatrist, a Dr. Melissa Ferguson.
She did. She confessed that she told Rusty about Dr. Starbranch's advice.
Specifically that she might hurt the children if she had another one.
Yes. But Rusty persuaded her otherwise. He appealed to his deeply held religious beliefs about procreation, and perhaps crucially, he complimented her on her mothering skills, convinced her she was a good mother.
So you have these two conflicting authorities. On one hand, specialized life-saving medical advice.
And on the other, this deeply embedded religious mission and spousal pressure.
And to compound this, she stopped taking the Haldol in March of 2000, 8 months before Mary was even born.
The one antipsychotic that had proven effective was removed from her system, leaving her completely vulnerable.
The final, catastrophic spiral began in 2001. Her father died on March 12th.
And that event triggered a total mental collapse. The source material notes she stopped taking any medication she had left. She started reading the Bible feverishly, but delusionally. She even mutilated herself.
And maybe most worryingly, she stopped feeding the infant, Mary.
Her ability to function just vanished. This led to another immediate hospitalization, this time under a Dr. Mohammed Saeed.
But even after she was discharged, the psychosis just got worse, and quickly. May 3rd, 2001 is documented as this terrifying rehearsal for what was to come.
She degenerated into what the sources call a near catatonic state.
For you listening, a catatonic state means she was nearly immobile, unresponsive, just detached from reality.
And while she was in this state, she filled the bathtub in the middle of the day. She later confessed she had actually planned to drown the children that day, but she stopped herself at the last minute.
That detail is so chilling. It shows the homicidal ideation was active. She recognized it, and she nearly executed it more than a month before the actual event.
But when she was hospitalized again the very next day, the attending psychiatrist assumed she filled the tub to drown herself. They focused on her established suicide risk.
Which is a classic example of a gap in recognition, isn't it?
A critical gap. While she had a history of suicide attempts, The failure to register the shift to homicidal ideation, or filicide, which is the term for a parent killing their own child, that is a critical point of systemic failure.
4 hospitalizations, 2 suicide attempts, multiple medication changes.
And yet the illness progressed because the underlying psychosis was just never permanently managed or contained.
And this overwhelming trajectory, it brings us to that dreadful day, June 20th, 2001, in Clear Lake City. At this point, Yates was still technically under the care of Dr. Side.
And the timing here is absolutely critical. Dr. Side had given explicit instructions that Andrea Yates needed 24/7 supervision.
She was not to be left alone.
Ever. Yet, Rusty left for work that morning, leaving her alone with all 5 children. His mother, Dora Yates, was scheduled to arrive exactly 1 hour later to take over.
And that 1-hour window, that's when the murders happen.
The sources lay out the chronology of what occurred when she was unsupervised, and it's chilling.
She started by drowning the younger boys, Paul, Luke, and John. She then carried their bodies and laid them meticulously in her bed.
After that, she drowned the infant Mary and left her body floating in the tub.
And it was at this point that Noah, the 7-year-old, he came into the room and saw what was happening.
Noah, the oldest, asked what was wrong with Mary. Realizing what was happening, he tried to run.
But Yates pursued him. She caught him, and she drowned him as well. The sources suggest there was a brief struggle.
After drowning Noah, she moved him into the tub with Mary. And then, in a final act of arrangement, she moved the infant Mary from the tub and placed her in John's arms on the bed, positioning the bodies.
The behavior after the act is just fascinating from a forensic and psychological perspective. It shows the strange difference between the complete breakdown during the act and then this almost routine compliance afterwards.
Indeed. Immediately after, she made 2 very methodical calls. First, she called 911. She repeatedly said she needed an officer, but she refused to say why.
And then she called Rusty.
And just told him plainly, come home.
And here's where we get a truly chilling psychological detail from the sources: the family dog.
It was found locked up. Rusty confirmed that the dog was normally allowed to run free around the house. It had been free when he left that morning.
So she locked it up.
A psychiatrist later alleged she locked the dog in a cage to prevent it from interfering with her process of killing the children. This detail is so crucial because it indicates a specific, calculated awareness,
Preventing interference.
even while operating under a profound delusion. It speaks to the complexity of that Immernatten rule we'll talk about. She knew enough about external reality to manipulate it, even if her internal reality was completely shattered.
She was compliant when the police arrived. She immediately confessed to drowning her children.
And that immediate confession, combined with the methodical arrangement of the bodies and the call to police, that would later become the central focus of the legal battle over whether she understood the difference between right and wrong.
So the first trial began in 2002. Yates confessed, but her defense team made a strategic decision. They rejected a plea deal for a life sentence.
And instead, they pursued the very difficult insanity defense.
And this decision, it really thrust the case into the spotlight as a test of the Immernatten rules.
Which formed the basis for most insanity defenses in the U.S., including Texas law at the time. And we really should stop here and explain what that means for you, the listener.
Please do, because just saying Immernatten doesn't really convey how difficult this is to prove.
Right. So the Immernatten rules, they come from an 1843 English case. They require the defense to prove one of 2 things. First, that at the time of the act, the defendant had such a defective reason from a disease of the mind that they did not know the nature and quality of the act they were doing. Or second, if they did know it, that they did not know what they were doing was wrong.
And that second part, not knowing it was wrong, that's where the Yates defense was. And it's an incredibly high bar to clear.
It is. Especially when the defendant's act seems so methodical.
So the defense experts argued that because her actions were driven by this severe delusion,
That she was an evil mother and that killing her children was an act of salvation.
she couldn't perceive the act as legally wrong, only as morally necessary inside her own psychotic reality.
But the prosecution's counter was simple. They argued that her calling the police, her confessing immediately, that proved she knew she was doing something illegal and punishable.
And the state sought the death penalty for capital murder. They argued very aggressively that, yes, maybe she was mentally ill, but she still met the legal standard for sanity.
They said she was legally aware enough to judge her actions as right or wrong.
The prosecution also introduced a highly inflammatory motive. They suggested the killings were an act of spousal revenge against Rusty.
which was aimed at undermining the mental illness defense by introducing a rational, though very dark, motive.
But the defense experts were firm on this. They uniformly denied any evidence that suggested spousal revenge was a factor.
In March 2002, the jury rejected the insanity defense. They found her guilty of capital murder. But
the jury then refused the death penalty. They sentenced her instead to life in prison with parole eligibility after 40 years.
And that split decision is very telling, isn't it? It suggests the jury felt they had to follow the letter of the law, the Amnaten law, and find her culpable.
But at the same time, they acknowledged the overwhelming medical evidence of her illness. They just weren't willing to impose the ultimate punishment.
There was clearly the struggle in the jury room between legal culpability and moral accountability.
But that conviction, it was later reversed. In January of 2005, a Texas Court of Appeals unanimously overturned the convictions,
citing what became known as the law and order error.
This procedural error is one of the most remarkable details of the entire case.
It is. It's centered on the testimony of a prosecution witness, Dr. Park Dietz, a very highly respected forensic psychiatrist.
And during cross-examination, Dietz claimed that a recent episode of the TV show Law and Order had aired.
An episode featuring a woman who drowned her children and was acquitted by reason of insanity.
The implication for the jury was just devastating. It suggested Yates could have been mimicking a media story to game the system. It made her actions seem calculated, not delusional.
But the author who was covering a trial, Suzanne O'Malley, who had also written for Law & Order,
she knew right away.
She immediately exposed the lie. She reported that no such episode had ever existed. Dr. Dietz had confused details of Yates's actual case with a fictional premise he had pitched to producers, a show that never even aired.
So the appellate court concluded that this materially false testimony was so prejudicial it might have tainted the jury's decision.
Right. It attacked the integrity of the defense and the core motivation of the defendant. So the result was a mandatory reversal and a new trial.
The 2006 retrial gave her a second chance. She again pled not guilty by reason of insanity.
And this time, the defense was able to focus entirely on the severity of the illness without that distraction of the false Law and Order story.
And the outcome was radically different. On July 26, 2006, the jury found Andrea Yates not guilty by reason of insanity.
This verdict legally affirmed that at the time she committed the killings, the defense had successfully proven she couldn't discern right from wrong due to her illness.
Following that verdict, she was committed to a high-security psychiatric facility, the North Texas State Hospital.
The sources note she was briefly a roommate of Dina Schlosser, another woman who committed infanticide, before being moved in 2007 to the lower-security Kerrville State Hospital,
where she remains today.
Yes, and it highlights the ultimate difficulty here. While the second jury found her legally insane, her actions were so severe that lifetime commitment to a secure facility was still mandated.
Beyond the legal side of things, the sources really force us to look critically at the circumstances that allowed this tragedy to happen, particularly the decisions made by Rusty Yates and the medical team.
The spotlight on Rusty is very contentious because his actions directly contradicted medical advice.
Yes, Dr. Said had explicitly ordered 24/7 supervision.
No exceptions.
Yet the sources confirm that Rusty started leaving her alone in the weeks leading up to the drownings. He made a fateful decision that weekend right before the tragedy.
He announced he was going to start leaving her home alone for 1 hour each morning and 1 hour each evening.
His justification was that he was trying to encourage her independence. He felt she was becoming too dependent on him and his mother.
But this is where the sources really emphasize the red flags that he seemed to either overlook or minimize.
Andrea's own mother expressed profound shock at this decision. She noted how obviously unstable Andrea was.
She recalled how Andrea had nearly choked the infant Mary by trying to feed her solid food in her delusional state. I mean, this wasn't subtle depression. It was gross maternal dysfunction caused by psychosis.
Rusty's public defense has always been that he wasn't negligent because he was never told the severity of the threat.
He claimed the psychiatrist never explicitly told him she was psychotic or that she was capable of harming the children. He said, quote, "If I'd known she was psychotic, we'd never have even considered having more kids."
Which directly contradicts the sources detailing Dr. Starbranch's explicit warnings years earlier.
It does. His claim places the entire burden on the medical community, suggesting a non-medical person couldn't be expected to see the danger. And that leads directly to the scrutiny of Dr. Mohammed Saeed.
Her treating psychiatrist in 2001.
And one of the biggest medical conflicts revolved around the medication. Specifically, Dr. Saeed's refusal to continue giving her Haldol.
The one antipsychotic that had worked so well back in 1999.
Right. Rusty testified that Dr. Saeed refused to use Haldol because he was concerned about severe side effects, like tardive dyskinesia.
But the defense expert, a Dr. Lucy Puryear, she provided critical counter-testimony. She argued that the psychosis came back specifically because the Haldol had been completely discontinued 2 weeks before the tragedy.
In a case of severe psychosis, removing the one medication that, controls the delusions, it's a catastrophic error.
And adding to this controversy was the antidepressant she was taking.
Affects her. Rusty and his relatives claimed that an improperly prescribed combination of antidepressants was actually causing or at least worsening the psychotic behavior.
And the dose was high, wasn't it?
Very high. She was taking 450 milligrams of Effexor. That's twice the maximum recommended daily dose.
And we now know that antidepressants, particularly in high doses and without an antipsychotic to balance them, can sometimes trigger psychosis.
They can. And the source material notes that homicidal ideation was formally added to the warning label for Effexor as a rare adverse event in 2005, years after this happened.
So we can't prove it caused her delusions, but it highlights the very precarious nature of managing these medications.
And we also need to address the systemic issue that may have impacted her care, the role of insurance. Rusty testified that the hospital staff seemed embarrassed when she was discharged from her last hospitalization in May 2001.
He implied the decision to discharge her wasn't about her being stable. It was driven by external pressure.
Specifically, the strict 10-day psychiatric hospitalization limit imposed by their insurance provider.
This detail provides such a crucial systemic insight. If doctors felt pressured to release a severely psychotic patient because insurance would no longer pay for inpatient care,
then this shifts the focus from individual error to a profound failure of the American healthcare model at that time.
The Yates tragedy, along with others, was instrumental in forcing a national conversation about whether profit and duration limits should override medical necessity for high-risk psychiatric patients.
Absolutely.
Finally, let's just revisit the role of religion. The media heavily scrutinized it. There were allegations that a preacher named Michael Warniecki was directly influencing her.
It's important to report that both Rusty Yates and Warniecki firmly rejected those allegations. They called the alleged link media-created fiction.
Warniecki maintained his correspondence with them was meant to strengthen their marriage, not to encourage any kind of harm.
But the most definitive and truly heartbreaking explanation of her motive comes from Andrea Yates herself, from her discussions with her jail psychiatrist.
This really eliminates all the external speculation.
It does. Her delusion was rooted in self-hate and a fear of damnation. She believed her children were doomed to perish in the fires of hell because she, their mother, was evil.
So she stated that the killings were necessary.
To save their souls from the seventh deadly sin, in her mind this tragic act was an act of salvation, which just demonstrates the complete devastating break from reality.
This tragic motivation really underscores that the crime was driven entirely by internal religious-themed delusion, which fulfills the criteria that the second jury accepted for legal insanity.
And just to close the loop on Rusty Yates, the sources indicate he filed for divorce in 2004, which was finalized in 2005. He remarried in 2006 and had a son. Before that marriage also ended in divorce in 2015.
The outcome of the Andrea Yates case, that shift from guilty to not guilty by reason of insanity, it really compels us to analyze the profound limitations of our systems. This tragedy forced a national conversation on postpartum psychosis and the immense difficulty of fitting severe delusion-based mental illness into rigid legal definitions of sanity.
And a crucial final point for the sources is that chasm between medical consensus and legal requirements. The entire medical establishment agreed Yates was suffering from a psychotic disease, but the law demanded proof that she could not judge right from wrong.
And the fact that the two trials had such different outcomes just reveals how fragile that legal line is when you're dealing with the human mind under such extreme duress. It also highlights the environment that allowed her illness to progress. Given those explicit warnings from her first psychiatrist, Dr. Starbranch, about the certainty of future psychosis if she had more children, this case raises a critical question for the medical and legal systems and for you, the listener, to consider. How should our systems approach patient noncompliance or spousal influence in these high-risk cases where continuing a behavior is virtually guaranteed to trigger a psychotic breakdown and potential harm?
This case continues to challenge us to redefine the boundaries of responsibility. Where does the patient's accountability end, and where does the systemic failure of the medical community, the family, or the insurance provider begin? It is a complex landscape that still requires deep consideration.
Thank you for joining us for this in-depth analysis of the source material.
Thanks for listening.